The December morning, I found a bright orange violation notice stapled to my mailbox. Was the same morning I decided I'd had enough of the Ridgemont Estates Homeowners Association and their petty tyranny. I'm Tyler Gaines, and I'd moved to this development in Lakewood, Colorado about 18 months prior, thinking the mountain views and modern amenities would make up for the soul-crushing conformity that comes with HOA living. I was wrong, but I didn't know just how wrong until that freezing Tuesday when everything changed. The notice flapped in the bitter wind, and I yanked it free with numb fingers. It was barely 6 in the morning, and I just wanted to grab my newspaper before heading inside with my coffee. Instead, I stood there in my bathrobe reading the most ridiculous thing I'd encountered in my 34 years of life. Violation notice. Unapproved structure on property. Section 4.2.8 of HOA bylaws prohibits the construction of any permanent or semi-permanent structure without prior board approval. The snow fort constructed on your front lawn is in direct violation of this policy. You have 48 hours to remove this structure or face daily fines of $500. Furthermore, the structure blocks the aesthetic continuity of our community and sets a poor precedent for neighborhood standards. I read it twice, then a third time, certain I was hallucinating. My snow fort. The snow fort I'd built with my nephew 2 days ago when he'd stayed over during the weekend. The pile of snow that any reasonable person would recognize as a temporary winter activity. The fort wasn't even that elaborate. We'd packed snow into a semicircular wall about 3 feet high and maybe 6 feet across. There was a flag stuck in the top, a little red banner that Danny had insisted we needed. It was childhood fun, innocent and temporary, and it would melt within a week or two anyway. But apparently, to the Ridgemont Estates HOA, it was a structure requiring board approval. I crumpled the notice and stormed back inside, my coffee forgotten. This was classic Karen behavior, and I had a pretty good idea which Karen was behind it. Brenda Morrison, the HOA president, lived 3 houses down and had made my life difficult since day one. She'd cited me for leaving my garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. She'd complained about my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. She'd even tried to fine me because my lawn was unevenly trimmed, which apparently violated the community's standards of excellence. I'd paid the previous fines, grumbling but compliant because I didn't want the headache of fighting. But a snow fort. A temporary pile of frozen water that my 7-year-old nephew and I had built for fun. That was where I drew the line. I grabbed my phone and called the HOA office, knowing Brenda would be there. She treated her position like a full-time executive role, despite the fact that she was a volunteer managing a neighborhood of 200 homes. Ridgemont Estates Homeowners Association. This is Brenda speaking. Her voice was crisp, professional, with an undercurrent of smugness that set my teeth on edge. Brenda, it's Tyler Gaines. I just got your violation notice. Good morning, Mr. Gaines. I trust you understand the severity of the situation. Severity, it's a snow fort, it'll melt. That's irrelevant. The bylaws are clear. Any structure requires approval. We can't have residents just building whatever they want whenever they want. Today it's a snow fort. Tomorrow someone might build an unauthorized shed or gazebo. We must maintain standards. I counted to 5, trying to keep my temper in check. Brenda, with all due respect, comparing a snow fort to a shed is insane. Kids build these things every winter. Not in Ridgemont Estates, they don't. We have a reputation to maintain. Several neighbors have complained. Which neighbors? That information is confidential. Of course it was. I suspected Brenda had complained to herself and called it several neighbors. I'm not taking it down. It's harmless. It's temporary and, frankly, your interpretation of the bylaws is absurd." There was a pause, and when Brenda spoke again, her voice had gone cold. "Mr. Gaines, if you do not comply within the 48-hour window, you will be fined $500 per day. That's not a threat, that's policy. I suggest you make the right choice." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone, fury building in my chest. This was exactly the kind of petty power-tripping nonsense that made HOAs universally despised. Brenda got off on controlling people, and I was her latest target. But I wasn't going to roll over this time. I spent the next hour researching Colorado HOA law, diving into statutes and precedents. I learned that HOAs had significant power, but that power wasn't unlimited. They had to operate within their bylaws, and those bylaws had to be reasonable. The question was whether demanding approval for a temporary snow structure could be considered reasonable. The answer seemed murky. Courts generally gave HOAs wide latitude, but there were cases where they'd overstepped and been slapped down. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. Marcus Webb had been my college roommate and was now a real estate attorney in Denver. We'd stayed close over the years, and I knew he'd at least point me in the right direction. "Tyler, long time. What's up?" His voice was warm, friendly. "I need legal advice. My HOA is threatening to fine me $500 a day because I built a snow fort with my nephew." There was a pause, then laughter. "You're joking." I wish I was. I explained the situation, reading him the violation notice word for word. His laughter faded as I spoke, replaced by professional interest. "Okay, that's ridiculous, but here's the thing. HOAs can be incredibly aggressive, and fighting them is expensive and time-consuming. Is this the hill you want to die on? Marcus, if I back down now, they'll never stop." "This is about principle." "I get that. Look, I can send you some case law to review, but honestly, your best bet might be to find something in your property deed or the original HOA documents that they're violating. Sometimes these organizations get sloppy, and if you can find an inconsistency or overreach, you've got leverage." "What kind of inconsistency?" "Anything. Improperly filed paperwork, boundaries that don't match county records, procedures they didn't follow." HOAs are run by volunteers who think they're experts but often aren't. They make mistakes. That sparked an idea. "You know what? I've never actually verified my property boundaries. The survey I got when I bought the place was pretty basic." "There you go. Get a proper survey done. It's a few $100, but it might reveal something interesting. And in the meantime, don't remove the snow fort. Make them work for their fines." We talked for a few more minutes, then hung up. Marcus's suggestion made sense. I'd bought the house through a standard sale, and while I'd done a walkthrough and reviewed the basic paperwork, I'd never questioned the boundaries. The property was marked by a wooden fence on 3 sides, with the front open to the lawn and street. I'd assumed everything inside the fence was mine. But assumptions could be wrong. I called a surveying company Marcus recommended, explaining I needed a rush job. The woman on the phone said they could have someone out by Thursday if I paid extra. I agreed immediately. 2 days. I could keep the snow fort standing for 2 days. Brenda called again that evening, leaving a voicemail when I didn't answer. "Mr. Gaines, this is your final reminder. Remove the snow fort by Thursday morning or the fines begin. I'd hate for this to escalate, but you're leaving me no choice." I deleted the message and went to bed feeling both anxious and defiant. Wednesday passed without incident. I half expected Brenda to show up at my door, but she stayed away. I spent the day working from home, my job in software development allowing me the flexibility to handle this mess while still meeting my deadlines. Every few hours, I'd glance out the window at the snow fort, standing there like a tiny frozen monument to childhood joy and HOA absurdity. Thursday morning arrived with fresh snow falling, adding another inch to the fort and making it look even more cheerful. The surveyor, a weathered man in his 50s named Dale, showed up at 9 o'clock sharp with a younger assistant. "You're the snow fort guy?" Dale asked with a grin. "Word travels fast. Small community. Brenda Morrison's been telling everyone who'll listen that you're a troublemaker." "Fantastic." Dale and his assistant spent 3 hours working, using GPS equipment and reviewing county records on a laptop in their truck. I watched from inside, drinking coffee and trying not to obsess over what they might find. Probably nothing. Probably the boundaries were exactly where I thought they were, and I'd be out a few $100 with nothing to show for it except the satisfaction of due diligence. When Dale finally knocked on my door, his expression was strange. Not quite a smile, but close. "Mr. Gaines, you got a minute?" "Of course." "What did you find?" He unrolled a large printout on my kitchen table, showing a detailed map of my property and the surrounding area. "Okay, so here's the thing. Your property line doesn't match what the HOA has on file." My heart jumped. "What do you mean? See this?" He pointed to a thick red line on the map. "This is your actual boundary according to the county records, and the original land survey from when this development was first plotted in 2008. Now, here's what the HOA shows as your boundary." He laid a second, slightly different map next to the first. The HOA map showed my property ending about 30 feet short of where Dale's survey indicated it actually ended. And that 30-foot difference, it included a significant portion of the HOA clubhouse. I stared at the maps, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. "Are you saying I own part of the clubhouse?" "Not part of it. About a third of it. The western wing where they have the meeting rooms and the exercise equipment. According to the county records, that's on your land." "How is that possible?" Dale shrugged. "Happens more often than you'd think." "My guess. When the development was built, someone made an error in the HOA documents. They assumed the clubhouse was on common property, but the actual deed tells a different story. Your lot, Lot 47, extends further west than anyone realized." I sat down heavily, my mind racing. "So the HOA has been using my property without permission?" "For about 16 years, yeah. You could make a case for adverse possession, but that's complicated and would require a lawyer. What's clear is that right now, today, that portion of the clubhouse is legally on your land." "Can you verify this?" "Like make absolutely sure." "Already did. Triple-checked against 3 different county databases and the original developer's plat map. This is solid." I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of the situation, the perfect irony, it was too much. Brenda Morrison wanted to fine me for a temporary snow fort while a permanent structure, the HOA's precious clubhouse, was sitting on my property without permission. Dale grinned. "I take it this is good news." "This is the best news I've had all year." After Dale left, I sat with the survey documents, reading through every detail, making sure I understood the full implications. The clubhouse encroachment wasn't minor. The western wing contained one of the 2 meeting rooms, the small gym, and some storage areas. It was probably a quarter of the building's total square footage, and it had been built without anyone realizing it was on private property. My property. I needed to talk to Marcus immediately. "Are you kidding me?" Marcus's voice exploded through the phone when I explained the survey results. "They built on your land, part of their clubhouse, yeah, about a third of it. Tyler, this is huge, like really huge. You have incredible leverage here." "What are my options, legally?" "You could demand they remove the structure, though that's nuclear and probably not practical." More reasonably, you could charge them rent for the use of your land, retroactive to when you purchase the property. Or you could negotiate an easement that gives them permanent rights in exchange for something valuable. What about just getting them to drop the snow fort nonsense? Marcus laughed. Tyler, you're thinking too small. This is leverage to rewrite your entire relationship with the HOA. No more petty fines, no more harassment. You could probably get them to reimburse you for every fine they've ever charged. I just want them to leave me alone. And they will. Trust me, once Brenda Morrison realizes what you've discovered, she's going to be very motivated to make you happy. We talked through strategy for another 20 minutes. Marcus advised me to send a formal letter to the HOA board, delivered by certified mail, informing them of the survey results and requesting an emergency meeting. He also suggested I hold off on making any specific demands until I saw how they reacted. Give them a chance to panic first, he said. People make better deals when they're scared. I spent the rest of Thursday drafting the letter, carefully wording it to be professional but firm. I outlined the survey findings, attached copies of Dale's documentation, and requested a meeting within 7 days to discuss the unauthorized use of my property and a resolution to current disputes. I didn't mention the snow fort specifically. I didn't have to. Brenda would understand. Friday morning, I drove to the post office and sent the letter by certified mail, requiring signature confirmation. Then I went home and waited. The call came at 2:30 that afternoon. Brenda's voice had lost its smug edge. Instead, she sounded strained, almost uncertain. Mr. Gaines, I received your letter. Good. Did you review the survey documents? I did. I think there may be some confusion about the property boundaries. There's no confusion, Brenda. The county records are clear. Part of your clubhouse is on my land. I'm sure we can resolve this amicably. Perhaps the survey is mistaken. Feel free to commission your own survey. I'm confident the results will match mine. There was a long pause. I could almost hear her brain working, trying to find an angle, a way to regain control of the situation. What do you want? She finally asked. I want a meeting with the full HOA board. I want my previous fines reimbursed. And I want a written agreement that I won't be harassed about trivial matters going forward. That's unreasonable. What's unreasonable is threatening to fine me $500 a day over a snow fort, while your organization has been trespassing on my property for 18 months, and probably trespassing on the previous owner's property for years before that. Another pause. I'll convene the board for an emergency meeting. Can you come to the clubhouse Monday evening? 7 o'clock works for me. Fine. 7 o'clock. And Mr. Gaines, I expect this to remain confidential until we've had a chance to discuss it properly. Of course, I lied. I'd already told Marcus, Dale, and 3 of my neighbors who'd stopped by out of curiosity. Word would spread. That was part of the pressure. The weekend felt endless. I kept checking my phone, expecting angry calls or more violation notices, but nothing came. Brenda was probably consulting lawyers, trying to figure out how badly the HOA had screwed up. I hoped she was losing sleep over it. She'd certainly caused enough sleepless nights for other people in the neighborhood. Saturday afternoon, my neighbor Rick stopped by. He was a retired engineer, early 60s, with a perpetual tan from his golf hobby. Hey Tyler, heard you're having trouble with the HOA. You could say that. Mind if I ask what happened? Brenda's been acting weird, canceled the weekend board meeting, which never happens. I gave him the abbreviated version, watching his eyes widen as I explained the survey results. Holy crap, you own part of the clubhouse. Looks that way. Rick started laughing, a deep belly laugh that took a minute to subside. That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. You know how much grief Brenda's given people over the years. Last summer she tried to fine the Hendersons because their kid's basketball hoop was 6 inches over the property line. 6 inches. And now this. I'm not trying to cause problems. I just want to be left alone. I get it, but man, the irony is perfect. He clapped me on the shoulder. Whatever happens Monday, know that you've got support. A lot of people in this neighborhood are tired of Brenda's act. That sentiment was echoed by several other neighbors over the weekend. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd suffered under Brenda's rule. There were stories of fines for slightly wrong paint colors, for holiday decorations left up too long, for cars parked in driveways instead of garages. Brenda ran Ridgemont Estates like a fiefdom, and she'd made plenty of enemies. Monday evening arrived cold and clear. I dressed in business casual, wanting to look professional but not overdressed. Marcus had sent me a memo outlining negotiating points and legal precedents, and I'd spent the afternoon studying it. The clubhouse was a 10-minute walk from my house, a modern building with large windows and clean lines. It was actually quite nice, which made the irony of the situation even sharper. The HOA had probably spent a fortune on this place, never realizing they'd built it partially on stolen land. The meeting room was in the western wing. My wing, technically. Brenda was already there when I arrived, along with 4 other board members. I recognized 3 of them: Patricia Flores, the vice president, Daniel Chen, the treasurer, and Susan Walsh, the secretary. The 5th person, a younger guy in his 40s, was introduced as James Norton, a lawyer the HOA had hired for the evening. "Mr. Gaines, thank you for coming," Brenda said stiffly. She gestured to a chair across from the board's table. "Please sit." The setup was clearly meant to be intimidating. Them on one side, elevated slightly on a platform. Me on the other side, alone. I sat down, placed my folder of documents on my lap, and waited. James Norton spoke first. "Mr. Gaines, I've reviewed the survey you commissioned. While the results are interesting, I think there may be some dispute about the interpretation. The county records are clear. County records can be amended. There's also the question of adverse possession. The HOA has maintained and used the clubhouse for 16 years. Under Colorado law, that could give us a legitimate claim to the property. I'd expected this. Marcus had briefed me. Adverse possession requires several elements, including open, notorious, and hostile use. Your use wasn't hostile because you believed you had permission. More importantly, I've only owned the property for 18 months, which resets any adverse possession clock. And even if it didn't, the HOA would need to prove 20 years of continuous use under Colorado statute. You're 4 years short. James's expression tightened. He hadn't expected me to know the law. Brenda interjected. "Mr. Gaines, let's not turn this into a legal battle. I'm sure we can find a reasonable compromise." "I'm listening." "We're prepared to offer you a one-time payment of $5,000 in exchange for a permanent easement, allowing the HOA to maintain the current clubhouse structure." I almost laughed. $5,000 for land that the clubhouse addition probably sat on was worth 10 times that, maybe more. And that didn't account for the years of use, the principle of the matter, or my leverage. "That's insulting," I said flatly. "You've been using my property without permission for 18 months. Before that, you were using the previous owner's property without permission. The rental value alone exceeds your offer, not to mention the cost of relocating the structure if I demanded it." Patricia Flores leaned forward. "You wouldn't actually make us tear down part of the clubhouse. That would be vindictive and serve no purpose. I don't want to tear anything down. I want fairness. I want reimbursement for the fines you've charged me." I want a written agreement that I won't be subjected to frivolous enforcement actions. And I want a formal apology for the snow fort incident. Brenda's face flushed. That's out of the question. Then we have nothing to discuss. I'll consult with my attorney about fair rental rates and send you an invoice. If you refuse to pay, I'll file a lawsuit and seek an injunction preventing any use of my property pending resolution. The board members exchanged glances. James Norton whispered something to Brenda, who shook her head firmly. This was going nowhere. I stood up. Thank you for your time. I'll expect a response to my terms within 7 days. If I don't hear from you, I'll proceed with legal action. Wait, Daniel Chen said. He'd been quiet until now, but his voice carried authority. Everyone sit down. Let's actually talk about this like adults. Brenda shot him an angry look, but he ignored her. I slowly sat back down. Mr. Gaines, you're right. The HOA made a mistake, a big one. And Brenda, you need to accept that this isn't going to be solved by stonewalling. He turned back to me. What's the total amount of fines you've been charged since moving in? $2,300. And you want that reimbursed? Yes. That seems fair. We should also pay you for the use of your land. I'm not a real estate expert, but let's say $1,000 a month for 18 months. That's $18,000 plus the fines makes $20,300. We'll write you a check tonight. Brenda sputtered. Daniel, we can't just hand out $20,000. We have it in reserves, and it's better than a lawsuit that could cost twice that much in legal fees alone, not to mention the possibility of losing and paying damages. He looked at me. In exchange, you grant us a permanent easement for the clubhouse structure. We'll file it officially with the county so there's no future dispute, and we agree to leave you alone about minor issues. No more harassment over snow forts or garbage cans. Fair. It was more than fair. It was exactly what I'd wanted. But I'd learned something about negotiation from watching Brenda operate. Never accept the first offer, even a good one. I want the easement to include a clause that allows me to use the clubhouse facilities free of charge, exempt from the annual HOA fee. The HOA fees cover more than the clubhouse, Brenda protested. Fine, prorate it. Give me a 50% reduction on annual fees for as long as I own the property. Daniel nodded slowly. We can do that. Anything else? I want Brenda to resign as HOA president. The room went silent. Brenda's face turned crimson, then white. Absolutely not. You've abused your position. You've harassed residents over trivial matters while ignoring the HOA's own violations. You threatened to fine me $500 a day over a pile of snow. You're not fit to lead. The board would never agree to that, Brenda said, her voice shaking with rage. But I noticed Patricia and Susan exchanging looks. Daniel was nodding thoughtfully. Even James Norton seemed unsurprised by the demand. Patricia spoke carefully. Brenda, maybe it's time to consider stepping back. You've been under a lot of stress and this situation has become personal. It might be better for everyone if we had new leadership. You can't be serious. I've dedicated years to this community. And we appreciate that, Susan added, but Tyler has a point. This could have been handled better. Brenda looked around the table, seeing no support, no allies. She'd burned too many bridges, made too many enemies. This was her reckoning. If I resign, she said slowly, I want it recorded that I did so voluntarily for personal reasons. No mention of this dispute. I nodded. Agreed. I'm not interested in public humiliation. I just want competent, reasonable leadership. Daniel took control. Okay, here's what we'll do. We'll draft an agreement tonight with all the terms we've discussed. $20,300 payment, permanent easement, 50% HOA fee reduction, and Brenda's resignation to be announced as voluntary. James, can you draft this? The lawyer nodded. It'll take a few hours, but yes. Then let's reconvene at 10 o'clock. Mr. Gaines, will that work for you? I'll be here. I left the clubhouse and walked home through the cold night air, adrenaline still pumping through my system. I'd gone into that meeting hoping for a decent outcome, but prepared for a fight. Instead, I'd gotten everything I wanted and more. At 10 o'clock, I returned to find the agreement printed and ready for signatures. James Norton walked me through each clause, explaining the legalese. Everything was as promised. The HOA would pay me $20,300. I'd grant them an easement for the clubhouse structure, and my HOA fees would be reduced by 50% for the duration of my ownership. Brenda Morrison would resign within the week, citing personal reasons. I signed my name and each board member signed theirs. Brenda's signature was barely legible, a sharp scrawl that conveyed her anger. Daniel handed me a check. I want to apologize on behalf of the board. This should never have happened. I appreciate that. And for what it's worth, I think you'll find things more pleasant going forward. Patricia will be taking over as president, and she's much more reasonable than Brenda was. I shook hands with everyone except Brenda, who'd already left, and walked home with the check in my pocket and the agreement in my folder. The next morning, I deposited the check and took a photo of the receipt. Then I went outside and demolished the snow fort myself, using a shovel to scatter the snow across my lawn. It had served its purpose. More than that, it had exposed a fundamental problem with how the HOA operated, and that problem was now being corrected. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By Wednesday, everyone knew that Brenda had resigned and that I'd somehow forced the issue. The details remained vague, since I'd agreed not to publicize the specifics, but rumors filled in the gaps. Some versions had me owning the entire clubhouse. Others claimed I'd threatened to demolish it. The truth was less dramatic but more satisfying. Patricia Flores called me on Thursday. "Tyler, I wanted to introduce myself as the new president and assure you that we're committed to a better relationship with all homeowners." "I appreciate that, Patricia. I also wanted to ask your advice. We're reviewing all of the HOA policies and procedures, and we'd like input from residents who have had negative experiences. Would you be willing to serve on a reform committee?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted nothing to do with the HOA ever again, but another part recognized that I had an opportunity to make real changes, to prevent future Brendas from abusing their power. "I'll do it," I said, "on one condition." "What's that?" "We make the financials transparent. Full accounting, available to any resident who asks. No more secret budgets or hidden spending." "Agreed. That's already on our list of reforms." Over the next few months, I attended committee meetings and helped rewrite large sections of the HOA bylaws. We eliminated dozens of petty rules, established clear procedures for enforcement actions, and created an appeals process for residents who felt wrongly cited. We also commissioned a full survey of the entire development, ensuring there were no other boundary disputes waiting to explode. The changes weren't universally popular. A few residents liked Brenda's strict enforcement and saw the reforms as a slide toward chaos. But most people were relieved. Ridgemont Estates became a more relaxed, pleasant place to live. I ran into Brenda once at the grocery store in late February. She saw me and quickly turned down another aisle, but not before I caught the expression on her face. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something closer to shame. She'd lost her little kingdom and she knew it was her own fault. I didn't feel bad for her. She'd had every opportunity to be reasonable, to be kind, to recognize that rules should serve people rather than the other way around. She'd chosen power over compassion, and it had cost her everything. My nephew Danny came to visit again in March, when there was still snow on the ground. We stood in the front yard, looking at the spot where the fort had been. "Can we build another one?" he asked. "Absolutely. Will you get in trouble?" "Nope. Not anymore." We spent the afternoon constructing an even bigger fort with walls on 3 sides and a flag Danny had designed himself. Neighbors walked by and waved, some stopping to admire our work. Patricia drove past and honked her horn, giving us a thumbs up through her window. That evening, after Danny's parents picked him up, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The fort stood proudly in my yard, a symbol of something larger than itself. It represented the right to enjoy your property without fear, the importance of standing up to petty tyrants, and the value of knowing your boundaries, literally and figuratively. Marcus called that night. "How's the HOA situation?" "Resolved. Completely resolved." "And the snow fort, still standing. Might keep it up all spring just to make a point." He laughed. "You've changed, Tyler. You used to avoid conflict. I still do, but I learned something through all this. Sometimes conflict finds you whether you want it or not, and when it does, you better be prepared to stand your ground." Wise words. "So what's next for you?" "I'm thinking about running for the HOA board next election. Patricia's doing a good job, but we need more people who remember what it was like under Brenda. People who'll fight to keep things fair. From snow fort builder to HOA politician, that's quite a journey. Someone's got to do it." After we hung up, I walked back outside one more time, standing in front of the fort in the darkness. It was just a pile of snow, already starting to melt in the warmer March temperatures. In a week or two, it would be gone completely, leaving only mud and memories. But for now, it stood. My nephew and I had built something together, something simple and joyful, and no HOA board, no petty bureaucrat, no violation notice could take that away. I thought about all the homeowners who'd suffered under Brenda's rule, all the ridiculous fines and arbitrary enforcement. I thought about the couples who'd fought over whether to pay or contest, the families who'd curtailed their kids' outdoor play to avoid violations, the residents who'd lived in constant low-level stress, worried about breaking rules they didn't fully understand. That was over now, at least in Ridgemont Estates. The HOA still existed, still had rules, still maintained common areas and organized community events. But it operated with a lighter touch, with an understanding that homes were meant to be lived in, not curated like museum exhibits. The irony of the whole situation still made me shake my head in wonder. Brenda had gone after me for a temporary pile of snow while her organization literally occupied my land with a permanent structure. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. But more than that, it revealed a fundamental truth about people like Brenda. They were so focused on controlling others that they never examined their own behavior. Rules were weapons to wield against enemies, not standards to live by. I'd seen that pattern before, in workplaces and social groups, anywhere people gained a little authority and let it corrupt them. The HOA presidency had given Brenda a platform for her worst impulses, and she'd used it enthusiastically until it finally collapsed beneath her. The question that lingered in my mind was whether she'd learned anything from the experience. Did she understand why she'd been forced to resign? Did she recognize her own role in the disaster? Or did she blame me, casting herself as the victim of an aggressive neighbor who'd found a technicality to exploit? I suspected it was the latter. People rarely saw themselves as the villains in their own stories, but that wasn't my problem anymore. Brenda Morrison was someone else's problem now, or maybe she'd taken the hint and retreated from community leadership entirely. Either way, I was free of her, and so was Ridgemont Estates. The reforms we'd implemented went beyond just rewriting rules. We'd changed the culture of the HOA, shifting it from an enforcement agency to a service organization. Instead of looking for violations, board members now focused on maintaining property values through positive initiatives, better landscaping in common areas, community events that brought neighbors together, transparent communication about budgets and projects. The transformation wasn't instant. Old habits died hard, and there were still occasional disputes about interpretation of rules or proper procedures. But the overall atmosphere improved dramatically. People stopped living in fear of their mailbox, stopped worrying that a minor mistake would result in a fine. They could breathe again. I became something of a folk hero in the neighborhood, which was both flattering and embarrassing. People I'd never met would stop me on walks to thank me for standing up to Brenda. Some shared their own stories of HOA abuse, tales that ranged from mildly annoying to genuinely disturbing. One woman, Helen, told me that Brenda had threatened to fine her while she was in the hospital recovering from surgery because her lawn hadn't been mowed. Her husband had been with her at the hospital, and their son was handling the mowing but had fallen a few days behind. Brenda hadn't cared about the circumstances, only about the violation. Stories like that reinforced my commitment to the reform committee. We couldn't undo the past, but we could prevent future abuses. We established a hardship policy that allowed residents to request temporary exceptions to rules due to medical issues, family emergencies, or financial difficulties. We created a mentorship program where longtime residents helped newcomers understand the HOA's expectations and procedures. We even started a newsletter that celebrated community achievements instead of just listing violations. The changes worked. By summer, Ridgemont Estates felt like a real neighborhood instead of a corporate campus. Kids played in yards without parents hovering nervously. People left their garbage cans out an extra day without panic. Holiday decorations went up early and came down late. Life became normal again. Danny came to visit in July, and we built a sandcastle in my backyard instead of a snow fort. It wasn't quite the same, but the principle remained. We were creating something together, expressing childhood creativity and joy, and nobody was going to stop us. "Uncle Tyler," Danny said as we worked, "why did the lady get mad about our snow fort?" I considered how to explain HOA politics to a 7-year-old. Some people like rules more than they like people. They forget that rules are supposed to help us live together, not control each other. That's dumb. Yeah, buddy, it is. Are there still mean rules? Some, but they're better now. Fairer. He nodded, satisfied with that answer, and went back to building a sand tower. I watched him work, this small person who'd inadvertently sparked a revolution simply by wanting to play in the snow. He had no idea what he'd set in motion, and that was probably for the best. Let him be innocent a while longer. That evening, after Danny left, I received an email from Patricia. The subject line read, "Boundary survey complete." I opened it with curiosity. The HOA had followed through on the comprehensive boundary survey I'd suggested, checking every property line in the development against county records. The results were eye-opening. 3 other properties had minor discrepancies. Nothing as dramatic as the Clubhouse situation, but still worth addressing. More importantly, the survey had revealed that several common areas the HOA maintained were actually owned by the county, which meant the HOA had been spending money on landscaping and maintenance for property it didn't control. Patricia's email outlined a plan to work with the county to formalize those arrangements, ensuring the HOA wasn't liable for issues on county land. She also mentioned that the board was considering offering small compensation to the 3 homeowners whose properties had been encroached upon. even though the encroachments were minor. This was exactly the kind of proactive, responsible leadership the community needed. Patricia wasn't waiting for problems to explode. She was identifying and addressing them early, communicating transparently, and treating homeowners with respect. I replied to her email, praising the thoroughness of the survey and agreeing with her proposed solutions. Then I asked if she'd considered making the survey results public, available to any homeowner who wanted to review them. Her response came within minutes. "Great idea. I'll add them to the community website this week." That kind of transparency would have been unthinkable under Brenda's leadership. She'd hoarded information, using it as a tool to maintain power. Patricia shared it, recognizing that an informed community was a stronger community. The months rolled by, summer turning to fall and fall to winter again. December arrived, and with it, snow. Danny came to visit, now 8 years old and even more enthusiastic about fort building. "Can we make it bigger this year?" he asked, eyes shining with excitement. "As big as you want." We spent hours constructing an elaborate fortress with multiple rooms, walls 5 feet high and turrets at each corner. It was ridiculous and wonderful, a frozen palace sitting in my front yard. Neighbors stopped to take pictures. Kids asked if they could help. We welcomed them all, and soon we had a dozen people working on the project, adults and children together, building something that served no purpose beyond fun. Patricia drove by and stopped to watch, her window rolled down despite the cold. "Tyler, this is exactly what community is supposed to be about. Just having fun. It's more than that. You've shown people they can enjoy their homes without fear. That's a gift." She drove off, and I returned to the fort, helping a 5-year-old girl pack snow into the perfect consistency for wall building. The afternoon sun sparkled on the snow, and laughter filled the air. This was what I'd fought for, this simple freedom to live without oppression. That evening, as neighbors headed home and the fort stood complete, I took a moment to walk around it, admiring our collective work. It was the largest snow fort any of us had ever seen, a monument to creativity and community. And it would melt, probably within a few weeks, leaving nothing but memories. But those memories would last. Danny would remember the uncle who'd stood up for his right to play. The neighbors would remember the day they'd all come together to build something pointless and perfect. And I'd remember the lesson I'd learned. That property rights matter, that bullies must be confronted, and that sometimes the smallest disputes reveal the largest truths. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey, I heard you built another snow fort. Bigger this time." "Much bigger." "Any complaints from the HOA?" Patricia sent me a text saying it was beautiful and asking if we'd build one at the clubhouse next year as a community event. Marcus laughed. "That's a hell of a turnaround." "Yeah, turns out when you remove toxic leadership, good things happen." You should write about this experience. I bet there are thousands of people dealing with similar HOA nightmares. Maybe I will, though I doubt anyone would believe the part about owning a chunk of the clubhouse. Truth is stranger than fiction. We talked for a while longer, catching up on life and work and everything beyond the HOA drama. After we hung up, I poured myself a whiskey and sat by my window, looking out at the fort illuminated by my porch lights. The next morning, I woke to find fresh snow had fallen overnight, adding another layer to our creation. The fort looked magical in the dawn light, like something from a fairy tale. I took a photo and sent it to Danny with the message, "Our fort got even better." His reply came quickly, full of emoji excitement. Best fort ever, he was right. It was the best fort ever not because of its size or construction, but because of what it represented: freedom, community, the courage to stand up for what's right. and the understanding that sometimes the most important battles are fought over seemingly trivial things. A pile of snow had changed everything. It had exposed corruption, forced reform, and reminded an entire community what really mattered. Not perfect lawns or uniform mailboxes, but the ability to live authentically, to play freely, to exist without constant fear of judgment or punishment. As I stood there, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over my frozen masterpiece, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Not just because I'd won my fight with the HOA, but because I'd helped create lasting change. The bylaws we'd rewritten, the transparency we'd established, the culture we'd shifted, those would benefit people for years to come. Future residents of Ridgemont Estates would never know Brenda's reign of petty tyranny. They'd inherit a community that balanced rules with reason, that maintained standards without sacrificing humanity. They'd build their snow forts and plant their gardens and paint their doors without fear, and they'd have no idea how hard won that freedom had been. That was okay. That was actually perfect. The best reforms are the ones that become so normalized people forget there was ever another way. I finished my coffee and headed inside to start my workday, leaving the fort standing proudly in my yard. It would be there when I looked out during my lunch break, still there when I finished work in the evening, and still there tomorrow and the next day until warmth and time reduced it to nothing but water and memory. But before it melted completely, before spring erased all evidence of its existence, that fort would stand as a monument to a simple truth, that knowing your boundaries, both literal and figurative, is essential to protecting your freedom. That documentation matters. That surveys matter. That reading the fine print and understanding the law can mean the difference between victory and defeat. And most importantly, that power unchecked always leads to abuse, but power confronted can be reformed, reshaped, and redirected toward good. Brenda Morrison had learned that lesson the hard way. The HOA had learned it too, and I'd learned something equally valuable, that standing up for yourself, even in seemingly small matters, can create ripples that change everything. My property line included part of their clubhouse, yes. But more than that, my willingness to fight for my rights had helped redraw the boundaries of acceptable behavior in Ridgemont Estates. Those new boundaries served everyone better, creating space for life to flourish instead of conformity to suffocate. As winter deepened and the fort eventually melted, as spring arrived and summer followed, as the seasons turned and life continued, that truth remained constant. We'd built something more permanent than any snow fort, more valuable than any clubhouse. We'd built a community that respected its members, that balanced order with freedom, and that understood the difference between rules that protect and rules that oppress. And it had all started with one simple demand: remove your snow fort. A demand that revealed an empire built on sand, or in this case, on land that belonged to someone else. The irony would never stop being funny, and the lesson would never stop being relevant. I never did take down that first snow fort, the one that started everything. I demolished it myself eventually, once the dispute was resolved. But in a sense, it never really came down. It stood forever in memory, a symbol of resistance and redemption, of courage and consequence. And every winter, when Danny visits and we build something new from snow and imagination, I'm reminded that the smallest actions can have the largest impacts. That defending your right to play is defending your right to be free. That property lines matter, but what matters more is the willingness to stand your ground when those lines are crossed. The HOA demanded I remove my snow fort. Instead, I removed their president, reformed their bylaws, and reclaimed not just my property but my dignity and peace of mind. That's a fair trade in anyone's accounting. And when I finally sell this house someday and move on to whatever comes next, I'll leave behind a better community than I found. A legacy measured not in structures or rules but in the quiet freedom of people living unafraid. That's worth more than any clubhouse, any easement, any check for $20,000. That's worth everything.